Just checking my audio here. Is anybody talking and I'm not hearing it? Or are we waiting for folks to join?
I was waiting for people to join,
Got it.
but okay. So I pinged Mark since that was the main topic I had for today. Deferred it from last week, just with Storage Developer Conference and other events. It was just too much. So I just pinged him to remind, and the other one is Sridhar said that some vendors have started shipping equipment to the lab. And we don't really have a full quorum today.
We got what, 7 of 10?
I guess we do. All right. Oh, Stephen joined. Okay, I missed that. So yeah, we've got 7. So we do have a full quorum. All right. So, okay, Mark doesn't join. Do we have any agenda items? I don't know. Have people reviewed the alpha beta requirements? Yep. This link. I will take that silence.
Trying to read it.
I have not. I don't want to get in the way of progress though, if I'm the one who didn't read it.
No, I don't think pretty much anyone did, which is it's okay. All right. So what do you guys want to do? So if Mark, I don't know what happened to Mark. Hopefully nothing tricky actually happened to him. Any other agenda? Are there any other agenda items? So unfortunately, I wasn't able to stick around during Storage Developer Conference at all. I basically showed up, did my talk, had a priority meeting, and then had to leave for additional. I mean, it was a weird week. So Dan, how did your talk go? I mean, how did you think your talk went? I mean, I thought mine was average. Was good enough for what was needed. And I don't know how much interest we'll generate, but it was at least, it covered the subject in the usual way and wasn't too bad. But it wasn't anything I would like brag about. How do you think yours went?
Yeah, I think so. I stood in for Naru Sundar, who had COVID running through his household that morning, and because that was the second or the third presentation, I think that went rather well. I got a lot of questions, and I ran out of time. I had to cede the the podium, but by the time I did my presentation on demos, that was the fifth 50-minute presentation of the morning, and I think it was a lot of the same. So I think we probably could have achieved the same goals with a lot fewer presentations. I thought it was good to have different vendors come up and go into deeper detail on their solutions. Like I thought the Marvell presentation was really good. But yeah, I think it achieved the goal. I think someone from Tania asked a question like, so why aren't you doing a standard? Like how are you going to get all the vendors to agree to anything? And I think especially in the demo presentation where we show like the open source code for storage for, 3 or 4 different vendors. I think that's the point we wanted to get across, is that that's how we're making progress. And if we need to go and make a SNIA standard on top of that, then great. We're obviously not against that at all. But our approach here, which I think is sound, is we're establishing an API that different vendors go and implement underneath. And that I think that there was a question on that, and then I showed it, and then I did the demo, and so I think that part went well.
Good.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. Doing a more open source as opposed to a more standards approach is interesting. Trying to write a tight standard would be a different kind of exercise. And certainly writing as we talked about, for a long time, trying to write a comprehensive single standard would be doomed to failure. So I think the open source approach is still worth pursuing, right? Staying on the plan for defining segments of APIs. And as you say, if it's, so we would be allowed to standardize directly, but I mean, we could also engage SNIA to standardize. SNIA would be, again, we would have to define the problem fairly well, but we could split the work up that way. I mean, this isn't like competing companies. SDO should be, very collaborative, just, to do the right thing for the industry. So if a SNIA approach and getting some SNIA project management would make sense for some aspect of DPUs and IPUs, then we should do it. And again, SNIA will be open to that, since I participate a fair amount in SNIA activities as well. They definitely be open for that. In fact, they're looking for a reason for the DPU committee to exist. All right. Any other topics or questions? So I don't know what happened to Mark. Hopefully nothing bad. And
He's on.
Here.
It looks like he
oh,
joined.
Mark, did you join? I wasn't watching.
I finally got Zoom to work.
There you go. I was worried about you. Okay, so
No,
now
Zoom was not cooperating this morning.
yeah. Like I said, I was concerned something else had happened. But
No, that was yesterday.
if it's just Zoom, then we're okay. All right, so we'll do the main agenda item, which is review the workshop and the API work that's been going on. And this will give us, the people who don't directly participate in that call, for as frequently as they would like, a chance to understand what's going on more deeply, and a chance to ask questions and comment. So I'm going to stop sharing, Mark, and you take it away. Yeah, and you should have said something when you joined, because I wasn't watching the participant list. It was hidden behind my one of my other windows. Anyway, stupid Zoom things. All right, please take it away.
Okay, hang on. Let me share the screen here. We wrote all this up, so guess I find the right stupid share. Well,
More dumb Zoom things.
yeah, Zoom's not cooperating with me here. We'll get there. I got too many windows open. Here we go. Finally. And it's running slow, so bear with me. Can you see the screen?
It's starting. I'll let you know when it's fully up.
Okay.
It's fully up.
Okay. So what we did, we held our first workshop really to discuss all of the networking aspects. We had an original agenda that we laid out, and we actually augmented the agenda at the very beginning of the meeting for the third time. So it's really, we wanted to go back and reiterate what the approach was for how we're going to address the API definitions. And really, the goal was just to utilize as many of the existing standards as we can as the reference model to create the common API. We've looked at the different references that are out there, and none of them really cover what a DPU needs to do in its entirety. There are pieces that we can leverage from different locations, but we can't just say, oh, go use OpenConfig, go use OVN, go use something. They just don't all utilize the things. So we took a step back and said, so what are the behaviors? How do we need to use them? What can we leverage to get all of that done? And then, of course, we kept augmenting the API workshop use cases. So you can see here, the original versus what's been augmented is kind of what's shaded back some in terms of the list. And of course, I look at mine in dark mode. So if you looked at this in the white background, you'd see a different shading. So to get down to the crux of everything, when we started looking at the behaviors, we identified these were the core items that we needed to address. We need to look like a NIC for different parameters, and we threw out a few examples of parameters that we would want to be able to handle as a NIC. So you have the MTU sizing, ARMON, netlink, or netdev type parameters, etc. So there's going to be a lot of parameters that we'll work through and define. We also need to have a DPU look like a virtual switch or router. Mainly, you've got to be able to set traffic flows through the DPU, perhaps flows across the DPU, depending upon how the deployment work. So we needed to look at, what is there for OpenConfig. One example that's out there is Sonic and Dash. There's one. That particular use case, we need to look at how that maps into this, how OBS and OVN may fit. We already have a use case around EVPN bridging, so we want to make sure that we keep that leveraged. We need to look at cloud. We have a cloud model that's been defined for networking. We need to keep how that works in mind. And then, of course, we also need to look at Kubernetes, and one suggestion was to begin with something like Calico, use the data plane API that's defined from Calico and that particular plugin, and then also keep in mind OpenShift. So we put all of these different things into this list of behaviors that we want to make sure that we cover. Link redundancy, load balancing, how we present VFs to the host, different policy type operations that we want to make sure that are covered in those behaviors, as well as tunneling. And we'll continue to add and iterate on this, but these are the ones that we initially identified in the meeting. When we started looking at the amount of behaviors that we defined, we started looking at it and saying, okay, so now we're back to boiling the ocean again. And we can't, from a open group, really look at this from the standpoint of trying to boil the ocean and define all of this at once. So we're going to have to break it down and look at the parameters on a use case basis. So what we started to do was lay out what are some of the key use cases that are out there that we're already seeing from the API group. So we already know EVPN gateway is out there. We actually have a live use case. We have a prototype that's going on, and there's quite a bit of development there. So we know EVPN gateway is one of the key use cases that needs to be out there. We also added ones, tunnel gateway aspects, internet as a service, several Kubernetes types, security, especially around the firewall offload. We've heard a lot of interest. I haven't seen it, but we've heard a lot of interest in that one. We've been hearing a lot of interest around TLS offload, TLS termination, and TLS policy operations. So from the group perspective, we really need to determine which of these use cases we need to focus on next. EVPN is well underway. We have a cloud example that's out there, although we haven't built the prototype around it. I mean, there's a little bit of work, but not a lot of work around a full cloud prototype within the OPI community. But we need to prioritize the efforts from the group perspective and determine which of these solutions would be something that customers are looking to do and will result in monetization for customers. And the reason we're saying this is because we realize that customers aren't going to want to pick this up, or vendors or whoever. They're not going to want to pick this up unless there's some sort of monetized use case that they can leverage and put into solutions. So that's kind of where we ended the meeting, is trying to now go back and say, from our perspective in the work group, where do we think the right use case is? And then the feedback that we want to give to the use case group is, what is the priority in terms of next use case we should work on? And it needs to be driven by customer requests and some sort of customer monetization. So that's kind of the high level summary of where we got in the first workshop in terms of definitions and things. So any questions on that?
Did the use case group comment on the use cases?
Not yet. We wanted to
Okay.
bring this first to the TSC.
Perfect.
So that we can then bring it into the use case group so that we can get this driven from both directions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the challenge I see here, Mark, is we don't have a lot of involvement in OPI today from what you're calling the customer, the companies that would monetize these use cases.
Correct. That's the issue. So, that right now we're guessing. We also have very limited contributors, because most of our contributors are part-time or even less than part-time. And so we want to make sure we prioritize correctly, so people who are trying to contribute or at least putting things in can at least focus on the right set of things to work on.
So which of these is the easiest? So which of the use cases would be the easiest to implement all of the APIs for, independent of which one would be the most value or the best? Just which one's the easiest?
It's a really good question.
Or
we know EVPN gateway got boiled down into just a couple of protobufs, so it made it relatively easy to implement. However, it's not fully what we would determine it's not fully baked, because it requires a bunch of pre-settings to already occur. So all those pre-setting things still have to happen in terms of the API. Building on that might be a good thing to do in terms of getting all the precursor work done. Another choice would be looking at TLS offload, because we do see a lot of customer interest in that, and it doesn't look like it would be a significant lift in terms of getting the protobuf definitions done and trying to get a prototype together. And then the third one would be something around the security and perhaps the firewall offload, although that one would be more complex, because you got to figure out, what firewall are we going to offload?
In the call, I mentioned that, I think that the tunnel gateway is probably a nice problem to solve, because it's usually self-contained. Like, you're usually doing this gateway because some other system can't handle the tunnels, the IPsec or what have you. So it's sitting in the network somewhere doing a gateway function, and so you go and you program it with APIs to, tunnel in equals, VLAN out, or tunnel in equals tunnel out. And the reason why I mentioned that one first is that it's very self-contained, and it has a very direct mapping of if I program this thing and I send packets through, I see the result, and all of our different devices can do IPsec and VXLAN and Genev tunnels, and when you start getting a couple tunnels at the same time, that's where you start needing these gateways.
Yeah, and and I'm glad you brought that up, Dan, because that's actually the other one that was of high interest in the discussions that we had, was also the tunnel gateway solutions.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
we do have to revamp all of the IPsec because it doesn't match the CRUD model right now. But we can do that in terms of the protobufs, and then redo the existing prototype that we've got for IPsec, and then expand from there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, and the question would be which tunnels. I mean, IPsec is fine, but would there other ones, and would there be any dash conflicts? Because I think,
well, we should definitely do just standard VLANs. We should do IPsec. We should probably do Genev, and then from there we could continue.
Yeah, I don't think that this conflicts with Dash because it would sit in a different place. This is a tunnel gateway that would sit in as an adapter. It's still coming in from the network, but it looks different than the Dash
okay,
smart switch.
And again, Dash is not only smart switch, but so that's a fair point. What we could do is say, look, for server embedded for this set of the most important tunnels to a particular server deployment. Yeah, okay, I'll buy it. I buy it. It's convinced me. And the reason I was asking what's the easiest is obviously because putting another demo out, especially if we could show that demo across all vendors, that would be fantastic, right? I mean, if we could take an IPU in the lab, NVIDIA DPU, Marvell DPU, an AMD DPU, and again, if we had a startup who could demo any of this as well, even if they didn't put something in the lab, that would be fantastic, right? Because we can say, look, you really can do it common. People just have to spend a little bit of time implementing it on each DPU. And it can sit on top of all the other stuff that's on the DPU because they're flexible in that way. I mean, that would be, again, we have some of that with the demos that already exist with the storage APIs and so on. Having one on networking that you could wave around and say, look, see, here's how the whole thing should work, might be our best route to generating another level of interest, right? Because people go, you actually could make this. Oh, I see how you make this work. And then the customer's like, okay, yeah, we want this across everything now. And if we get
I was going to say, Joe, the big question though is which ones are the customers most interested in, right? Because you could do one and they'll go, yeah, that's really cool, but that doesn't solve anything that I need to solve today.
Well, so I think, okay, so yeah, that's going to be tricky, except what I was thinking is if we could do one, we could say, here's all the others, here's how it works. If you like that, and you have to put out some kind of public statement. Oh, demo, we'll need to do an article, right? A little white paper explaining how it works, explaining that it's on all the vendors, explaining how, what the porting was to each vendor, and then put that out there and say, and here, and then list, here are all the other use cases that we're contemplating, and again, the problem isn't that the mission is wrong. The problem is that in the industry, lots other than the tier 1 clouds and a few sort of specific use cases, there's a lot of wait and see with these devices, right?
Yep.
And again, there's some tier 2 clouds, and they're sort of direct, very tight relationships with between the DPU vendors and the specific customer. To do something general like this, we need the broad set of customers to engage. To do that, they have to actually be willing to adopt DPUs.
Yep.
And to do that, some of them, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why they might or might not, but this, I don't know, this seems like a reasonable approach to making that happen.
No, I'm fine with it. I'm just, like I said, I'm just worried that there's not going to be uptake from it.
Well, there may not. Okay, so all right, it's a good point. Is there an alternate way we can leverage the API or make a decision? I mean, technically, which of these fills the biggest gap? That's the next question to ask. So which of these are something where there isn't a good answer sitting out there right now? And again, open it up to everyone. But Mark, I don't know if you've thought about that and have an opinion.
So the one that we keep hearing most about is TLS offload and termination. That one seems to be a sticking point from at least various customer inputs.
Okay. So, I mean, we could, and again, that one could be done fairly isolated from all the rest, right? It doesn't have a lot of dependencies, to my understanding. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
It's sort of intertwined, right? Like, are you doing KTLS? Are you doing a TLS proxy? There's a couple different approaches to do it, and then it becomes a question of where, in comparison to doing TLS offload on the host, right? You have to weigh the different options. So in that meeting that we had, I brought up, or I think maybe it was Boris who brought up the idea of doing the like Envoy ingress offload as opposed to just a TLS offload. So you get into those types of discussions where because the TLS by itself is sort of fraught, because you have to go over this interface. By moving the whole Envoy ingress, layer 7 processing off, you get a lot more bang for your buck, and you fix a lot of the TLS issues, TLS layering issues. But we have to have that discussion. Like, we have to go through all of these different approaches, and I think that each individual vendor has invested a different amount to each of the approaches, and we'll have to sort that out first.
I assume this is TLS offload for a workload that is on the host.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah,
okay.
It's offloading the TLS stack.
So not a workload that's on the DPU, IPU itself.
Okay. We have like NVMe over TLS, which I think will happen in this storage use case. But that's a little different. But that's an example of, you could offload the TLS on the device, just free up some cores.
The Nginx use case that we're actively trying to get working now, will as a second phase handle that TLS offload via a proxy to a workload on the host. So we'll do it.
Exactly. And so this is the type of thing that we'd have to go and work out, is like, what's the model of how you're doing that host TLS offload? I think there's a ton of different approaches. And you know, I've seen data on new CPUs that show that they're starting to get really good at doing TLS in cores. So we'll have to compete with that. But I think that, you know, if we wanted something for us to go and solve an industry question, an unanswered industry question, it's a great one.
Yeah, I think if we're running the TLS offload in Nginx, as Paul's talking about, you know, we're going to run the TCP probably on the ARM complex. The question is, how do we engage with the crypto offload pieces, right? As part of that function.
Yep.
And so that's sort of a piecemeal approach, Mark, where we're basically giving the toolkit to build the use case and not necessarily trying to build the whole use case, because that becomes very specific to what you're building with and why you're building it.
Yeah, and the goal here is to get the toolkits together.
But if we're doing this phase 2 Mark's talking about, we would be looking for those toolkit pieces so that we could plumb those in to our already existing Nginx solution and create the equivalent of what we've been doing on a host for years, right? But do it on the DPU, using DPU hardware offloads where we can. And the APIs we need are, how do we tap into those hardware offloads?
Yeah.
Yep.
Or the instructions, or however it's being done, on the platform. You know, 'cause it may vary. Sometimes it's better to do it with AVX, and sometimes it's better to do it with a look aside. You know, there's a ton of different options already on the host, so we just have to translate those over.
Yeah, if you're using hooks in the instruction set on the CPU complex, Dan, is that really something a OPI API would get involved with?
Potentially not, but you know, we've always seen this, you know, push and pull where, depending on the workload, sometimes it's better to use the look aside, and then other times it's better to use the instructions, and then you need some sort of heuristic to decide which one to use, and you know, or which one have you already turned on and are burning power for. You know, it gets complicated. There is a, you know, we've learned that we're sort of unable to do these, you know, these offload interfaces in DPDK. Can't just do them in a vacuum, because oftentimes there's cases where just doing it in the cores, especially with something like an AVX, is faster.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. I'm just wondering if that's something OPI would be involved with. I mean, so often that's done through a library or something that the vendor offers that allows a end user to easily get access to those instruction sets without having to rewrite his own code.
So excuse me, Marvel has added a TLS record processing offload to DPDK recently. It's not TLS handshake, but TLS record processing.
Right. So that's a bulk crypto offload, right? As a look aside.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Dan is just saying don't ignore the AVX style ISA enhancements that one could get. And I don't dispute that those are there, Dan, but I am interested in at least solving the look aside use cases.
Gotcha.
So it sounds like from the discussions that the top of the list is the TLS offload. So if we wanted one thing to pursue its high priority, that sounds like the leading candidate. Does anyone else have a
Well,
different opinion?
It's either that or tunnel gateways. Those were the two that we've been discussing.
Right, but we could do. So I mean, again, if you wanted a number one priority, it sounds like the TLS is both relatively straightforward, can be implemented across all the DPU vendors.
So in the in the call we had, we asked the question, maybe it's rhetorical, of should the use case group prioritize these for us. I'm also happy to do it here.
No,
but
well,
I,
no, okay.
sorry.
Which is why I'm bringing it to the TSC.
Yeah, so I'm gonna say no. Well, again, it's worth discussing in that forum as well. But I think we have an overriding concern of getting something technical, API networking in front of everyone. Here's an output from OPI that's useful. I mean, TLS offload and policy setting, and setting up determination, or even just inquiring as to what you have available on the DPU, is another piece, is valuable. It may not be a complete use case by itself, but it can be. And it meets the criteria of not being a massive project, so that something can be put in front of people, especially if it was in conjunction with running in the lab. So you could say, look, here's the video showing it running. We ran this in the OPI lab across all the vendors, and here's the value it gives you. If you want to come contribute to use cases and work, we're next taking on, I don't know, tunnel gateway or whatever the use case group says. But I think having the releasable demo on something, I agree, people are asking for, and isn't completely solved already, it would be good. And then if you don't have a DPU, could you use those same APIs across all the Linuxes? Maybe you could have pretend you have a DPU and use the same APIs. Maybe. I don't know if that would have any legs, but just brainstorming for a minute. So I would say that that one is the best one. The firewall would be a very good one. The problem is firewall is not as straightforward, and there are a lot of varieties out there, and there's a lot of vendor specific stuff out there that doesn't have good common encapsulation. K8s. My next one would have been actually the Kubernetes, right? So if we could, but just from a use case point of view, but I could see tunnel gateway as well. But again, tunnel gateway is sort of bound up in what your underlying networking stack is as well, isn't it? Again, if I'm doing VLAN / VXLAN, Geneve, and all that has to terminate into a routing stack. Would we abstract away, OVS and Sonic at that level? And that would be a porting effort or something, and just define. And again, the Sonic and the OVS have ways of setting some of the tunnel stuff already. So how
I
would
would say
that,
OBS, yes. I don't know about Sonic. I don't know
it can run,
how.
it can run VXLAN tunnels, for example.
Right, right.
So-
But if it's Geneva or something else, but yeah, one of those. I don't necessarily think you need to have virtual routing, uh, fully baked with BGP or whatnot for a tunnel gateway. But yeah,
What-
the nice thing about this one is it does go scratch the surface on like, okay, well, what's your networking protocol, a networking control plane for these tunnels. You have to create a lot of virtual layer 2 domains to bridge across, and then with IPsec you do some routing across. But that all of these things are getting you started on the broader that broader list that we itemized, like the link failover, redundancy, that type of stuff. You start to get into the really long list that that we said are the set of use cases. But no, I recognize that if not well scoped, it can just fall back into that big long list that we said was just way too much. I agree with that.
Mark or others?
I'm okay with focusing on the TLS offload. I can pass that on to the group, at least to begin with.
Yeah. Again, you said what's the top priority, right? One.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So after the discussion, I think TLS offload probably is the top priority. Does anybody think a different one would be more useful as just, the first in what's presumably a list? Okay.
Yeah. Well, we already know we have to go fix the IPsec gateway, so that's one we have to go fix anyway.
Okay, so TLS offload and fix IPsec gateway.
Yeah, those are the ones.
So if you focused on those two, you could, I think that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is prioritization, right? So what is the okay, did anybody object to that conclusion or think a different conclusion would be better or want to discuss it more fully? No? All right.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on the workshop or any other observations from the workshop?
So Mark, if we go back to your initial statements, right? You had a pretty interesting list going into the workshop. The group, it sounds like you looked at the list and went, this feels like boiling the ocean. We need to cut this down somehow.
Yep.
And that led you to the use case discussion as a way to do that.
Yep.
Is that a correct summary?
That's the correct summary.
Yeah, because I agree the list is intimidating, but there are some things in the list that it feels like, I guess what I'm driving at is, do we have, and we absolutely need, sort of this basic network connectivity API or set of APIs, right? And I think those were somewhat captured in parts of that list.
It is.
There are things like, how do I configure my port at the most basic level, right? How do I establish a VLAN at the most basic level? How do I steer traffic, whether it's at L2, L3, or L4, from the port to the ARM complex, from the ARM complex to the host, from the host to the port, from the port to the host, right? Basic steering of traffic through listener tables established in the hardware at either L2, L3, or flow levels.
Yep. Those are all the things that we discussed, we put into the various lists that are in here.
Yeah. I think when you go into any of those use cases, they all need those things. So.
Mm-hmm. And
do you think we have those defined?
The different flow paths or the
Yeah, the
underlying?
basic underlying
No.
network connectivity.
No, we don't have the basic underlying pieces defined. We've looked at, like I said, we've looked at open switch and OBS and OVN, and they all have varying ways of doing it, but none of them fully cover a DPU. If you just say, oh, well, let's just go use this one, it doesn't fully cover a DPU. So any of them don't fully cover. So it's a matter of we have to go through all of these and try to figure it out. The best way we figured to do that is let's attack it from a use case perspective and try to map each different use case and get the basics put in place and then build our way up to cover the use case and then move on to the next one. And it's really because we have very limited contributors right now. So we got to focus who can contribute on to the key things that we need to work on.
So Tim, on the work you guys are doing, is there anything you're like, yeah, gee, I really wish we had, and fill in the blank?
How should let Paul answer that? I think we're about to produce a list of those things.
Okay, yeah, if you can send that list, then we can put that onto the table also.
And I think they're along the lines of that basic network connectivity.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, the initial stuff is, other than configuring the ports, and enabling the traffic out in and out of those ports, is going to be out setting up L2 and L3 tables to steer the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very simple stuff, but it would be nice if we weren't doing that differently on every DPU out there.
Yep.
Right. Be nice if we had a common interface to do that. So even though under the covers may be using different backends, the front end looks the same.
Right. So these APIs get much more interested and complicated as you get into the really sort of money use cases, but at the heart of them, there's a few simple things that actually is what 90% of it's used for. So, and I'm sort of driving at, let's not get scared by the 10%. Let's get that 90% in place.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, agreed. Anyone else? All right, for the DPU vendors on your DPUs, is that, I mean, certainly everyone supports TLS in one form or another. Is that API reasonable to implement on your DPUs? I mean, I can't see why it wouldn't, but seems worth asking the question.
No issues from us.
Yeah, we already support whatever the infrastructure is in Linux or DPDK or wherever the TLS stack is. So as long as we can use that for our vendor backend, I think we should be okay.
And then Oren? I think I caught Oren on double mute. All right. All right. Well, anyway, so we have our priority. We're going to go with TLS and fix the IPsec gateway and once that's settled, then we can pick another one.
Yep.
But what I believe we should do, and Paul, for this will tie into outreach, is once the TLS is done, we should publish something on it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because to actually generate interest, we have to say, here's a problem that needs solving, here's the solution, and here's why you should care. I mean,
Right.
that, you know, it's the obvious and typical sequence. So
Mhm.
that's what we should do, because without that, you know, I don't think we're gonna, I mean, it's the next best thing to try to generate wider interest and more activity. And since this is something practical, blah blah blah, all the stuff we talked about, it's right. You know, that's what we should do. All right. Any final comment from anyone? I'm done. Otherwise, thank you, Mark. Yeah, good discussion.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. All right. All right. We'll close the meeting. Talk to you guys soon.
Okay, bye.
All right, thank you.